What happens after you die? Your body dies, but do you? If you are watching this video, I know that you know the difference between you and your body. For centuries, people have debated what happens after death. Is it lights out forever? Do we move on to another existence? Or does something else, something far more complex, happen? New research is finally giving us real answers. Scientists, doctors, and even quantum physicists are uncovering evidence that suggests death might not be the end at all. And what happens next could be far stranger than anyone ever imagined. Before we go into this concept, let us first discuss the science of death. What happens in the first few minutes? Because to understand what comes after, you first need to know what actually happens when life ends. When your heart stops, everything else follows. Blood stops circulating, oxygen stops reaching the brain, and within seconds, you lose consciousness. But here's the strange part. Your brain doesn't shut down immediately. Scientists have recorded brain activity for minutes after clinical death, with some studies showing bursts of high-frequency gamma waves. This is the type of brain activity linked to consciousness and perception. This is why people who've been revived often report near-death experiences, floating outside their bodies, seeing a bright light, or even reliving their entire lives in an instant. Many recall details they shouldn't have been able to perceive while unconscious. And here's where things get even more unsettling. Some studies suggest that in rare cases, people have been aware of their own death. But what does this mean? Now, let's get into some of the answers. 1. Consciousness doesn't die with the body. The biggest discovery in recent years is that consciousness may not be tied to the brain the way we once thought. Dr. Sam Parnia, a leading expert on near-death experiences, studied hundreds of cardiac arrest survivors. He found that many patients reported conscious awareness even when their brains had no detectable activity. Some described events in the hospital room with eerie accuracy, things that were later verified. If consciousness was purely a product of brain function, this shouldn't be possible. But if the mind can exist outside the body, then death isn't the end. It's just the transition of awareness from one state to another. Quantum physics backs this idea too. Some physicists suggest that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, not just a byproduct of the brain. If this is true, then your awareness, the thing that makes you you, could continue beyond death. 2. Time may stretch infinitely in your last moments. Many who've had near-death experiences say they saw their whole lives flash before their eyes. Scientists believe this happens because, in moments of extreme stress, the brain shifts into an altered state of perception where time slows down dramatically. But what if this doesn't stop? Some theories suggest that as the brain loses oxygen, it enters a state of timeless consciousness, meaning that your perception of time could stretch infinitely. If this is true, you could spend what feels like eternity in your final moments, reliving your past or existing in a dreamlike state. This idea is supported by studies on brainwaves during death, which show a final burst of hyperactivity that could explain why people see tunnels, lights, or even deceased loved ones. If time becomes meaningless at death, then the end might not feel like an end at all. 3. The universe doesn't allow true nothingness. If you think death is just nothingness, here's a problem. True nothingness doesn't exist. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. Your body decomposes and returns to the earth. But what about the energy that made up your thoughts, your awareness, your consciousness? Some physicists believe that consciousness is a type of energy or information, and according to quantum mechanics, information cannot be erased. It can only be transferred. That means the you that exists as awareness must go somewhere. Whether this means you move into another state of existence, return to some kind of universal consciousness, or continue in an unknown form, science is telling us that complete nothingness is simply not an option. 4. The brain's final burst, a doorway to another state of being. Studies show that just before death, the brain experiences a final surge of activity. In 2022, researchers studying a dying patient's brain recorded a pattern of gamma waves linked to memory recall and perception. In other words, the brain was showing activity after the person was clinically dead. Some believe this burst is the brain's way of processing death, a last effort to make sense of the transition. But others think this could be something deeper. What if this final surge is not just the brain shutting down, but the consciousness detaching from the body? Many who have survived near-death experiences describe a feeling of separating from their physical form, watching themselves from above, or even moving through a tunnel of light. If the brain's last moments are spent in a heightened state, then maybe this isn't just death, it's a doorway. 5. Some scientists believe in a quantum afterlife. Dr. Stuart Hameroff and physicist Sir Roger Penrose suggest that consciousness is stored in the universe at a quantum level. They propose that the human brain is not just an electrical organ, but a quantum processor. When we die, the quantum information in our brain isn't lost. It disperses into the universe. If this is true, it would mean that death isn't a destruction of consciousness, but a return to a larger universal field of awareness. Some people who have had near-death experiences describe a feeling of merging with something vast, peaceful, and infinitely intelligent. If the quantum theory of consciousness is correct, then death could simply be a shift from one state of awareness to another. 6. Reincarnation might have scientific backing. Many cultures believe in reincarnation, but there are documented cases that defy explanation. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist, spent decades studying children who claimed to remember past lives. He collected over 3,000 cases where children accurately described details of people, places, and events they couldn't have known. Some of these children had birthmarks corresponding to wounds their previous identities supposedly suffered. If consciousness was tied only to the brain, this shouldn't be possible. But if consciousness is something independent of the body, then reincarnation may be more than just belief. It could be a real phenomenon. 7. The light people see might not be what we think. For decades, people who have had near-death experiences, NDEs, have reported seeing a bright light. Some describe it as a tunnel, while others say it feels like an overwhelming presence of love and peace. The scientific explanation is that as the brain shuts down, a surge of neural activity creates a visual effect similar to a bright tunnel. When blood flow stops, neurons fire randomly, and the occipital lobe, responsible for vision, floods the mind with artificial images. This explanation might seem sufficient, but there's a major problem. Why do people who have been clinically dead for several minutes or even hours report this same experience consistently across different cultures, ages, and belief systems? One theory suggests that the light isn't just a hallucination, but a fundamental shift in awareness. The human brain might not be the only source of perception. Consciousness could extend beyond physical limitations. Some researchers argue that the moment of death could trigger a transition from our limited three-dimensional experience into a different state of existence. If our minds are capable of perceiving reality beyond the confines of the brain, then the light may not be a dying brain's illusion, but an actual doorway to something we can't yet comprehend. In this case, people aren't just seeing something, they are experiencing a transition in real time. The most intriguing part is that thousands of people have returned from clinical death reporting an identical sensation of being drawn toward the light. Many claim they encountered deceased loved ones or felt an overwhelming presence guiding them. Some scientists, particularly in the field of quantum physics, suggest that this experience may be a crossover into another plane of consciousness rather than just a shutdown response. Whether the light is a natural effect of the dying brain or an entry point to another existence remains a mystery. But the consistency of these reports makes one thing clear. It's not something we can simply dismiss. 8. Some people may remain conscious for hours after death. We've always assumed that once the heart stops, consciousness disappears. But multiple studies suggest that the human mind may remain aware long after clinical death. In 2018, researchers found that brain activity continues for minutes, sometimes even hours after death. Some people who were declared dead and later revived have shared eerie accounts of what they saw and heard during that time. They describe floating outside their bodies, seeing doctors attempt to revive them, and even recounting conversations that took place in the room, details that were later verified by medical staff. If consciousness truly depended solely on the brain, this shouldn't be possible. What's even more shocking is that some revived patients report sensations of traveling outside their physical form and observing events from a detached perspective. Many of these experiences are consistent with what is often called an out-of-body experience. Some scientists suggest that when the brain is deprived of oxygen, it may enter a hyper-aware state, allowing the mind to process reality in ways we don't yet understand. But this still doesn't explain how people are able to recall details they couldn't possibly have seen. Some doctors now believe that a part of our awareness exists independently of the brain, capable of perceiving reality even when all measurable brain function has ceased. If that's true, then the nature of death itself changes. Instead of a total shutdown, it could be more like a gradual separation of consciousness from the body. This would mean that when we die, we may not actually lose our awareness at all, it simply shifts. Could this explain why some people see their own bodies after death or experience sensations of floating? If so, then our traditional understanding of death might be entirely wrong. 9. Death might be an illusion. If consciousness is not limited to the physical brain and time doesn't move in a straight line, then what we call death might not actually exist at all. Many scientists, particularly those in quantum physics and neuroscience, are beginning to question whether the idea of a permanent end is even real. Some propose that the body dies, but the mind, our awareness, continues in some form. This doesn't necessarily mean an afterlife in the religious sense, but rather that the very concept of non-existence might not apply to consciousness the way we assume. One key argument for this idea comes from studies on near-death experiences and consciousness research. If people are capable of perceiving things while clinically dead, if time is fluid, and if energy cannot be destroyed, then the logical conclusion is that something must continue. Some scientists suggest that our sense of self is merely a construct of the brain interpreting signals, and that once the body dies, awareness might return to a larger, universal field of existence, one we can't yet fully comprehend. If this is the case, then what we fear as death could simply be the removal of the illusion that we were ever separate from it in the first place. If you have made it this far, comment down below with the word 100% to confirm that you have received the knowledge from this video. For more interesting topics, make sure you watch the recommended video that you see on the screen right now. Thanks for watching.